Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and it's been a while since we've done one of these videos, but we're going to take another journey into the Starmap and talk about a system that's started with a lot of hype and excitement, but at the end of the day, hasn't really gone in the direction anyone would have ever expected it to, and that's Leir. Now, Leir was first discovered back in 2677 when an ICC scan team in Banshee discovered a large jump point. Now, they went through, they plotted the point, and upon entering the Leir system, they did some in-depth initial scans. And what they found was a Type 5 blue-white star that's about twice the size of Sol and about 10 times brighter, which in turn created a very large green band that encompassed all three of the planets in this relatively small system. Now, having 3 planets in a green zone meant exciting possibilities for mining and terraforming and settling, but there was a reason that the system didn't see the fate that many others do when they're discovered, and that was primarily because Ileana Messer was the Imperator at the time, the same Messer who killed her father to gain control of the entire empire. Now, she was so focused on gaining more power and more control that she didn't really want to expand into other areas at the time. She wanted to pull things in closer and really focus on what they already owned, so the system just sort of sat there without much settlement for a while. Now, we did see some kind of rogue miners and drifters work their way into the system to make what they could out of it, but that was in some pretty small numbers. Leir 1 is a relatively small, rocky, and terrestrial planet with some settlements, but the population totals are pretty small overall. Those that do live here are primarily focused on mining. Leir 2, otherwise known as Maya, is where the primary history and interest is at. Leir 2 had the only notable community on it for several decades, but in 2743, Galor Messer was in power, and he had this crazy objective to reform all of the government buildings in the entire empire, and as you can imagine, that was a very expensive proposition. So in order to try and fund that project, he decided to auction off the terraforming rights to Maya. Once it hit the auction block, a little-known group known as Hatfield and Harding put in a bid so high that people thought it was either a mistake or a joke. Now, the bid was very real, though, and being venture capitalists and kind of next-level thinkers, they saw this as a huge opportunity to try and take advantage of the large amounts of mining and deposits and potential tourist attractions and all of that sort of thing to turn a profit. Hatfield and Harding were a little bit eccentric, but they were also smart enough to know what they don't know, and that was terraforming. So they went searching to find an export, and Retor, they found Dr. Fael, who was hired to take on the project of terraforming in Leir 2. Hatfield and Harding decided to give this respected doctor the leeway and control to do whatever he needed to do, and since they wanted to get it done quick to start collecting profits as soon as possible, they didn't really care what he did as long as it got done. Now, that lack of oversight did mean that the doctor had free reign, which wouldn't have been a problem if he didn't have his own objectives, and from that point, things started to get a little bit weird. He set up on one of the terraforming domes over one of the largest mining reserves to hide what he was doing during the terraforming process, and that was to mine away and steal some of the profits. At this point, Hatfield and Harding had no idea what was taking place. Next, communication from the doctor started to become less frequent and all but stopped, and many had assumed that he had some form of like a psychological break, but nothing was done from the company to see what was taking place because progress was still ongoing. Then, in 2803, Fael won Employee of the Year, for some reason for the company, which in a way sort of showed how little the company knew what was happening on the planet, but it got even stranger because he actually opted to not show up for his award presentation. Instead, he decided to send a video acceptance focusing on the purity of purpose, even though no one really knew what that meant. Then in 2812, terraforming on Maya was officially listed as completed, but by this time, all communication from the planet had been cut off. Then, one day, a video just showed up to the offices of Hatfield and Harding, and it was a note from the good doctor stating that he had finished, get this, purifying the planet, and it was now going to remain under his control, not theirs. Humanity, with all of their ego and carelessness, didn't deserve this planet, and it wouldn't be tolerated on his perfect planet, and that they would fight to the death to protect what they had built there. The company was obviously pretty pissed off about this, and at first they didn't want to believe it, but eventually they decided enough was enough and they were going to go in and reclaim what was rightfully theirs by hiring a bunch of mercenaries to overtake the group that now inhabited this planet. Now, when they did land at the main settlement, nobody was there, so the mercenaries started to search around, and what was happening was a massive ambush from the doctor's crew, which killed the mercenaries and now empowered them because they were able to take the ships that carried the troops there, which they're now using to protect the planet from space. At this point, the company decided enough was enough again, and it was time for government intervention, and showed up before the Senate. Now, if you remember, though, this isn't a UEE-claimed planet, since Ileana Messer didn't claim it based on her own goals, so the Senate didn't really have much jurisdiction to do much here. So they weren't going to get the help that they needed from the government. Now, they probably could have hired a larger force to do whatever was necessary, but their investors lost faith in the direction of the company, and as they began to back out, so did the funding, and the company ended up going bankrupt. Today, the planet is still inhabited by the descendants of those settlers and the scientists, and while they did want to protect the planet, they're also willing to let people come in to visit the location, so you can go check out Maya if you want to. It is interesting to note that they're going to sell goods from the planet, but they have no interest in buying anything that comes from the outside. They live on everything from Maya, and the planet's buildings have an interesting look, being that they're all very similar as they're constructed from the planet's stone, and a lot of these buildings are actually just carved into the mountainsides. It's supposed to be a beautiful planet with many mountain ranges and green areas for you to go see. The last planet in Leir is Leir 3, and you're probably familiar with this planet from the Homestead demo. It's a sandy desert planet that's home to the giant Valakar, which is that large species of sandworms that actually live under the surface. Based on these worms, all the settlements here are temporary, and those that live here have a nomadic existence to avoid issues with the worms. Now, there is good mining to be had on this planet for graphite and crystals, but the worms provide a big problem. Leir as a system is very well connected. It has 6 total jump points, and what makes it so interesting is that it has connections to Vanduul space through Vanguard, UEE space through Banshee, Cabal, and Elysium, and Banu space through Yulin, as well as a jump to a developing system of Garon. So, who may want to come to this system in the game? Well, I think those of you that are interested in being a merchant might find some value here, because it's pretty likely that the goods from Maya are at least of interest, as the history there is kind of interesting. So you could pick stuff up here and sell it on the other side of the galaxy for a pretty good profit. Leir 1 also seems to be a relatively isolated planet, and the people here do trade. And with not much else going on in the system, it's possible that they're in need of supplies from the Empire. Also, for those of you that are interested in interspecies trading, this seems to be a good location, because with the Banu on one side and the UEE on the other, you're probably able to do some trading between both. And speaking of that, the Banu are known to trade with the Vanduul, and with this connecting those two empires together, you could potentially buy Vanduul goods from the Banu in this area. Now, being one jump away from Vanduul does indicate that escorts may be needed, so those of you that are fighters could be hired here, or those of you that are wanting to just protect the system or just flat out fight the enemy, this could be a good jumping off point. There also isn't a gas giant here, so having a Starfarer could provide some above average sale prices on your fuel. And with this being a fairly active hub, any sort of support type of operation like repair should have value, as ships are going to break down, there's going to be attacks from hostiles, so if you have a crucible or a ship like that, you might find good work. And finally, I think for those of you that are interested in mining with prospectors, you could make a pretty penny here, because all 3 of the planets are listed as mining locations, and the prospector is capable of landing on planets. So if you can get down on the planet and do some work there, I think you're going to have opportunities. I think a prospector would be an interesting option on Leir 3, because the worms would likely not tolerate a physical permanent mining platform, but a mobile ship like the prospector could potentially get around enough to stay out of their focus. So that's it for the Leir system. It's an interesting system that probably could have been a lot more, but still has a cool backstory and good value for those of you interested in making some credits in the verse. So if you have questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys watching. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.